AfterBuzz is here to cover it for you right now.
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AfterBuzz TV. And now, let the buzz begin.
Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I am absolutely excited to be here. My name is Christian Cole, and I am joined by two fine panelists, two veterans of AfterBuzz Television to discuss UFC 21. First, allow me to introduce you to our veteran host, Gabriel Gonzalez. Gabriel, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm great, man. Hey, fans, you can find me on Twitter to talk everything UFC at Double G on TV.
Double G on TV, and without any further ado, I want to introduce a black belt training with Henner Gracie, training with all the Gracies, training with everybody, Mr. Chris Howard. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here. No, I can't say black belt in jiu-jitsu. I'm a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. If I said that, Henner would choke me.
And we don't want that.
Yeah, no, we don't need that. No. But I'm doing well.
Well, my mistake on the research for you, Mr. Howard.
That's all right.
We are very happy to have you here.
Welcome to the UFC show.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you, Gabe.
Chris, especially excited to get some of your experience as a martial artist and to sort of break down these fights that we saw yesterday. We were very excited to have that introspective
Absolutely.
here at AfterBuzz.
I'm thrilled to do it. Thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So without further ado, we want to get right to the action from what we witnessed UFC 21 on Fox. It was really an incredible event. We just talked about it a little earlier when we were having our powwow before the show. This did not disappoint. It was almost a pay-per-view caliber type of card. We had a lot of great fights on the card, a lot of finishes, including one in the main event, which is where we'll start. We saw Carlos Condit sort of looking for his place and his future here in the UFC against a formidable opponent in Damian Maia. A man who is a specialist in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and sort of striking and other things, maybe not so much, although he's no slouch. He is an old school throwback fighter where you witnessed guys back in the day, they used to have, they would specialize in specific elements of martial arts. Now you have MMA fighters. In this case, you have a guy who is a jiu-jitsu master, and we saw it on display yesterday.
No, definitely. I mean, when I was breaking it down, I thought Carlos Condit's versatility, it's going to pose a lot of problems for Damian Maia. I mean, yeah, we've seen Maia over the years grow his stand-up game, but at the same time, it's Carlos Condit. We all saw the war he had with Robbie Lawler. So for Damian Maia to do what he did, it was very impressive, and all of this title shot talk is warranted after that victory.
And title shot conversation is what's happening now. If you weren't privy to the finish of that fight in Carlos Condit, he actually took him down, took his back, went with a rear naked choke position, but actually didn't lock it underneath the chin, locked it on the top of the chin. Can you shed some light, Chris, on that?
He sank it pretty good. He had... When he took the position, first he started with a body triangle with the legs, and so he had really good control from behind. When he sank the choke in, what he wasn't able to do was latch on. Typically with the rear naked choke, you look for him to grab the bicep and put the hand behind the head or slice it across the top, and he wasn't able to quite get that. But the V, when the V gets lined up with your trachea and your windpipe, you can tell. So it became pretty obvious that he was going to go out, that Condit was going to go pretty quickly there. The thing about Damian Maia though is he's a serious jiu-jitsu player. He's not, he beat Saulo Ribeiro in jiu-jitsu. He had a couple of losses to Roger Gracie, who I've been blessed to train with as well. Roger's like a big wet blanket. You can't do anything with Roger. But Damian Maia he's playing at the level, I mean, he fought Jacare on a couple of occasions with one win due to an advantage on the jiu-jitsu playing field. So he's a serious player, and the throwback style I thought was the perfect style for this match.
Chris, I want to go back just real quick to the actual choke. Can you explain to our viewers at home a little bit about why is it that that choke above the chin there and not below the neck can be just as dangerous, and a guy like Carlos Condit, a tough dude, would actually tap out to a choke like that? What does it feel like to have that across the chin?
Oh, it sucks. No, if the choke is sunk pretty deep, and while we saw it on the top of the chin, it really was underneath as well. Sure. And essentially, for the rear naked choke to work, all you got to do is block the carotid arteries, and it happens pretty darn quickly. I mean, I've been choked unconscious before, and I didn't see it coming. When it hits you, it hits you. and it blocks the blood flow, not the oxygen flow to the brain. And there's nothing you can do when it comes time to tap. You either go to sleep or you tap.
And
It's
he
true.
did tap, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say the thing about a guy like Damian Maia who's been grappling for so long that even if he doesn't have your necessarily
Perfect position,
textbook, textbook rear naked choke that's gonna cut off the air, he's got that kind of grip that it's pretty much like a triangle choke. Instead, he's cutting off the blood on the sides of the windpipe going on. So you have to worry about something like that. And like you said, Carlos Condit is one of the toughest guys in that division. So you have to think it was putting a lot of damage on him. I think he maybe thought because Maia was holding it for a few seconds, he maybe thought he could outlast it. Maybe Maia's arms gas out. That's why we saw him kind of... He was waiting for it, probably a few extra seconds than I think a lot of people were expecting. But I think he understood that, I don't want to cause extra damage by going unconscious.
Gabriel, I want to get your opinion on the
Sure.
future for Carlos Condit. We're obviously going to talk about Damian Maia. We're going to talk about his potential to be a champion in the UFC after a very long career there in the main company where MMA plays, right? But I'm curious, what's the future hold for Carlos Condit?
That's a very good question. I know that after the fight he was talking about, the big quote is that I don't know if I should still be here at this level anymore. And that's very tough when you consider the fact that in January he was 5 minutes away from becoming the UFC welterweight champion. And he's been the interim champion before. He's obviously been in the promotion for a few years now. I think it's tough because he's in a bit of that no man's land. The top of that division is so competitive. You obviously have Tyron Woodley, Robbie Lawler at the top. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is there. Now Damian Maia. We have rumors all the time about George St. Pierre coming back. The fact is, Carlos Condit returning to necessarily title contention right now is pretty far off. And for a guy who's been in the promotion that long, has had such a long career, he has to evaluate for himself. He can still fight. There's no question. But I think if the belt is just not going to be there anymore, does he still have it in him? And that sounds like something that he's been conflicted with a long time, and he alluded to that in the post-fight press conference.
You're making a fantastic point, Gabriel. I would suggest that Carlos Condit has never been a prize fighter. He has always had his eyes on the gold. Carlos Condit has always been a alpha male elite fighter, a type of guy who only wants to be there to win championships. He's not like a Nate Diaz or his brother Nick or some of the other fighters who are there to make money, there to just get that next dinner plate on the table. Carlos Condit is there to win fights and win championships, and I think he's starting to doubt himself over these last few fights, last year or so. When they asked him about retiring, I got the sense that he wasn't ready to commit to that. But does that mean that he would maybe go to a Bellator or to a different company where he can compete and be a big fish in a small pond? We've seen that happen recently with Rory McDonald, which we will talk about soon in this broadcast. But Chris, tell me a little bit. What do you think? I mean, what did you tell from that interview, and what's the future hold for Condit?
For me, I think that anytime you capture somebody right after a fight, they're in the worst mental state that they could possibly be in. They just lost. And there's all sorts of things that are going on. He's still processing, so I don't think that I don't put much on the post-fight interview. I just say, okay, here's a guy who got it handed to him basically, and he's down, and he's down on himself. I don't think that says anything about the future for him. I think it'll be a week, 2 weeks before we hear what's really going on coming out of it.
And I think especially, Chris, to your point, this was a tough loss for Condit because he didn't really get to display his skills in this match. He kind of started to go. He was going to try a striking battle. Maia, shot the takedown, I think, with a double leg, put him down on the ground, took his back, and choked him out. So we didn't get to see Carlos Condit, this version of him in August 2016, what he can do now. I think Condit's going to come back and want to display whether he has those skills. Really a bad matchup with Maia. Maia's a jiu-jitsu master, and he displayed it yesterday.
We also got to mention the fact Carlos did acknowledge that he was also rattled by the ground and pound. So even his defense on the ground, he admitted, Maia just essentially found the mark early and often, and obviously he got that 3-minute victory. But yeah, it's tough. Remember that he also was out pretty much a year after the injury to Tyron Woodley. So you have to think maybe he's starting to feel the milds a little bit. But definitely, I think he has at least 1 or 2 more great fights in him. I think after he gets the loss out of his system, then he will really evaluate what's next. Is he going to stay in the UFC? Does he want to maybe try a payday in Bellator? But I think definitely Carlos Condit, he's got a lot of fight left in him.
I think he's still a young guy. He's still at the top of his game. He's just fighting in the like these guys in UFC are no joke. I mean, so I think there's still a lot of money to be made if you're Carlos Condit. I could see a potential rise again, maybe, but it'll be sad to see if he does hang him up because I'm a big Carlos Condit fan. That is one of the toughest fighters in UFC, and he kind of has this commercial appeal that I dig about him too. That's really good for the company. But let's switch gears down to
The
Maia.
only thing I'll say is that with this sick skill level of Damian Maia, it's no wonder that he walked right through him. And Carlos Condit is a very capable fighter with the right matchups.
Right.
And so I think I don't think he's going to have any problems coming back once he gets over the
But
post-fight
Chris,
depression.
can he beat a Tyron Woodley? Like in a fantasy booking right now, you put those two together.
I think it's possible.
Yeah.
I think it's possible.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really get to see what would have happened. Obviously, when they fought once before, Tyron Woodley was winning the first round before Condit went out with I believe it was the ACL tear in his knee.
A couple years back.
Yeah, so we never got to see what would have played out, but certainly on paper, that was another fight we thought Condit, Woodley, that's a pretty even fight considering how explosive and dynamic those two are.
Absolutely. We just talked about Tyron Woodley, and that seems to be in the sights of Damian Maia. It seems to me like Dana and the booking crew are going to want that matchup next. Although we do know that Woodley has a fight coming up, Maia said in his post-fight interview he will wait to see who wins that fight and then take the winner of that. I think he deserves it. He's, I think, ranked number 4 going into the fight yesterday. We will probably see him jump up at least to 3 or maybe even number 2 in the world. What does Damian Maia need to do to beat a guy like Tyron Woodley if that's the matchup that ends up happening?
I think you got to go back to exactly how he fought Condit. Just really put that pressure first. Don't let Woodley establish any striking early on the feet. And I think he knows the advantage for him is on the ground. Woodley, yes, great wrestler, but put him on his back. Obviously, that's exactly where Damian Maia wants him. Getting there, though, that's another big question. Like we talked about, Woodley has business with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. First of all, there's no guarantee he gets by that kind of beast.
No, there's not.
But then Ariel Helwani put it very bluntly, Wonderboy Thompson has earned it. If GSP comes back, he should be fighting for the title. That's the money fight everyone wants to see. So Damian Maia as the third guy in line, even, convincingly so, I'm not sure if waiting it is smart, but if you think maybe possibly a year to a year and a half waiting, because you don't know what's going to happen with this
welterweight division. Maybe it might be a year or so till Maia gets that shot with Wonderboy, and if Wonderboy takes the belt off Woodley, that could be even longer. So, but a year, Chris, talk about what you would think. I mean, how would it make you feel as a jiu-jitsu practitioner, as a martial artist in general? How would it make you feel to see a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy be the top of the 170 division in a division filled with mixed martial artists?
Right.
You have a true Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy. How would that make
The reality is, they all do jiu-jitsu these days. You can't fight without having it in your arsenal. And having said that, I think it's neat to see Damian do that. And what I'll also add to that is his big problem, as Joe Rogan called him the throwback, as you had mentioned. But when you look at him as a throwback, in the old days, the problem that they had eventually was people figure out the game.
Yes.
And that's the challenge that Damian Maia is going to have, is because he is so powerful at one side of the game. Pretty soon, people start to learn how to defend the clinch, how to defend the takedown.
Wouldn't you argue, Chris Howard, that the fact is that jiu-jitsu may be one of the most difficult elements of fighting to overcome? I mean, this is wrestling and jiu-jitsu in the early 2000s seemed to be the dominating factors in MMA, and now we have MMA trained guys who do all-around training in their gyms. But I find that if you are a jiu-jitsu master, it is very, very challenging for a boxer or a wrestler to beat you, because at the end of the day, they just have to tap you out. They just have to get you to say, I don't want to fight no more. And that's what we saw yesterday.
It's been proven time and time again that they are superior arts once you can get the person to the ground. The matches, therefore, had to be changed. So now you've got the gloves that don't protect the fighter's head. They protect the hand, because you couldn't go and slug it out like they do without breaking your hand. The skull is very, very thick, whereas the hands have so many little teeny bones that'll break easily. So you couldn't box like we see people boxing in real life. But that's why typically they'll switch to palm heel
fist.
strikes, or hammer fists. But then also you've got the addition of the gloves, you've got the rounds, and you've also got the stand up. So they'll stand you up if you have inaction, whereas in jiu-jitsu, sometimes that's the best thing to do, is to wait things out until the other person gasses, like you said, before you go and apply a choke or something like that. So the rules have evened out the playing field to give the punchers and the kickers a stronger chance. I got my first black belt in striking arts under Ron Van Cleef, who just got indoctrinated as being the oldest fighter ever to step into the octagon. Oh, wow. Dear friend. And he, when he went in, not knowing what to expect. He's a 7th degree black belt, and Hoist just wriggled around on him and choked him out like an anaconda. But now the rules have changed everything. So with the new rules, punchers and kickers, we get to see the rock'em sock'em robots more often. But I don't have anything against stand-up arts. I was a stand-up artist to begin with.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second with you,
sure.
Gabriel Gonzalez. Sure. I'm curious, is it a problem for the UFC to have a BJJ guy be a champion, and especially one who isn't flashy? He doesn't cut the best promo. He's not really the guy that's going to sell fights with his mouth. Is that dangerous for UFC in a time where Conor McGregor and Ronda Rousey, these sort of bigger than life stars, have led the sport?
Absolutely not. And the only argument I need, George St. Pierre, the biggest pay-per-view draw among them in the promotion's history, exactly the same. Everyone said he's not exciting. He just takes you down, conservative ground and pound every time he's fighting. GSP became one of the biggest stars ever. And for Damian Maia, I'd like to point out, he is evolving his game. A very important stat, only 13 strikes he's taken in his last 4 fights. That is ridiculous. Yeah. And by the way, I want to make sure I have the numbers. This against Gunnar Nelson, Matt Brown, Neil Magny, obviously Condit now. You tell me those 4 guys combined only got 13 hits on Maia? It is not his fault that guys can't stop his attack. He is doing what he needs to do to improve his stand-up, so he can then facilitate his way to the ground.
And also I want to mention that I think that the UFC fight fan has gotten smarter over the years.
Yes, definitely.
And what we've noticed is that fight fans are now more interested in takedowns, in grappling, in octagon control, in all aspects of the game, not just boxing. It seems like a lot of boxing fans in the early 90s and 2000s transitioned into UFC fans, and that's all they wanted to see was punching and kicking. Now we're noticing that you hear the crowd sort of get excited when you just see a sweep or a transition. That's really exciting for us because we are fight fans in that manner too, and now the crowds are starting to come around.
So they're more sophisticated.
More sophisticated is a great way to put it. Yeah.
I'd like to point out, I think it's not necessarily seeing the ground game. It's about action and activity. I know we're going to get into it momentarily, but obviously when you have a fight like, say, Anthony Pettis, Charles Oliveira, yeah, there was a lot of grappling, but you got to see reversals, switches, the sophisticated, educated fan. A guy like Damian Maia, who's constantly working for it, not necessarily a guy who's just really kind of sitting, using top position and waiting, running out the clock. I think that's what makes him so successful. And then also the fans are coming around to him saying, hey, you pretty much got to get away from the boa constrictor on the ground. So
yes,
I think that's just what fans are, what you're referring to, being more educated. They understand and respect that from Maia.
I think so too, and I think all of our AfterBuzz fans watching at home would agree that being an educated fight fan can make you really enjoy the nuances of the sport more than just sort of hoping that 2 guys beat the crap out of each other. Yes. That's part of it, but we also want our fans to know that this is important to see the artistic elements of this sport. And in that, at the end of the fight, we saw that these are 2 respectable guys. And you actually just mentioned Pettis and Oliveira, also 2 very well-respected fighters. Pettis coming off of a really tough couple of years. He was on top of the planet with coming out of WEC originally several years ago, and then making his transition into UFC. We saw Pettis on top of the world and slowly get kind of taken off that throne. It was a tough way to watch Pettis go down over the last couple years. But yesterday, facing Charles Oliveira, You know, I honestly felt like out of the gates, Pettis had a 10-8 round in the first round, and boy, did that change as the course of the fight. What were your thoughts on the first round, and how did it develop for you, Gabriel?
Oh, definitely Pettis was in control. We saw just what made him so dynamic. Obviously, he was getting the edge of the striking. Even when Oliveira got him to the ground, his ability to reverse those positions. Mind you, Oliveira is not a slouch in jiu-jitsu either. He's a great grappler.
Not only a slouch, but he has some legit.
Yeah,
I mean, he was a real BJJ practitioner there yesterday in that fight.
Yes, he was a high-level guy. We see just the versatility of Pettis' game. Obviously, we know he's a phenomenal, one-of-a-kind striker with his running off the cage kicks and things that everyone has seen already. But he has a legit ground game. Remember WEC submitting guys like Shane Roller, guys like that. So Pettis, I have to point out, in the second round, it seemed like he was starting to gas out a little bit.
Yes,
and
yes.
I actually contributed that. It's his first time at 145. He's been a natural 155er. I think maybe the weight cut is a little tougher on him than he expected. I expect that to change as he has more experience now. But I thought, I think that it's kind of getting to him, especially when you consider that Oliveira was starting to take some solid right hands and just still coming forward.
Yes.
But obviously the ending of the fight, we saw the brilliance of Anthony Pettis on the ground. Just phenomenal fight and a great debut at featherweight.
And Chris Howard, I had Pettis losing round 2. How did you have that fight through 2 rounds? Did you have 10-8 in the first round?
Well,
like
I wasn't scoring it. I just get so into it.
Sure,
Sometimes
sure.
I'll lose it. But I was watching. What I really liked about Oliveira was the way he was closing the distance. I mean, when he pushed it, when he went to go for the clinch, he pushed it right up against the fence. He wouldn't let the pressure off, which really, really worked in his favor. But I had Pettis leading it. I mean, because at the end of the day, you just looked at the damage that was being sustained, and they were shots that were getting through. It's like, okay, I'm giving it to Pettis. And then I was shocked, really, when Pettis sank the final guillotine. It just wasn't expected.
And he did do that. And I want just before we get to that finish of the Pettis and Oliveira fight, Chris, tell me a little bit about how difficult it is in the guard to not only deliver ground and pound, but give me both perspectives. When you're on top and a guy is defending you with his legs, sometimes in a butterfly guard, sometimes not.
Right.
How hard is it to land those strikes accurately? And give me the other perspective
It
as well.
totally depends on the defense of the guy on the bottom. Because if you've got a good defense, you can tie up the head, you can overlay the arm, and you can prevent the strikes on either side. The only thing that they've got is a little rabbit punch to the side.
Because what I was noticing was that that Pettis' ground and pound in round 1 was incredibly effective, and yet I was still very complimentary in my mind of what I was watching from Oliveira. I mean, incredible defense on the ground, and yet the ground and pound from Pettis still exceptional.
Yeah,
that's crazy that Pettis has that kind of skills in ground and pound. Talk about how hard that is.
For
to
sure.
do
Well,
that.
once again, there's almost a broken rhythm thing that has to happen. If the guy on the bottom has a really good defense in his guard, you have to break the rhythm, and we can see him come over the top with an elbow, and we'll see. And once he gets over the top, and I noticed that Pettis had done that. And Oliveira had to keep crawling his hand back in to attempt to stop that. As long as he held the bicep, he could prevent the elbow from coming over the top. Sometimes he had it, sometimes he didn't, hence the periods where he could break the rhythm and pound through. What I liked that Oliveira was attempting to do was some up kicks from the bottom, which can be devastating if
Chris,
they
I thought
hit.
that he should have used that a little bit more. There were moments where I thought Pettis' chin was there for the up kicks.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about in a jiu-jitsu defensive position on your back, why you wouldn't want to throw those? Can you get in trouble by throwing those kicks?
Not at all. If anything, it's gonna help. And the kick can be to the shin, can be to the knee, can be directly to the face. And I saw him throwing a lot of those later on in the fight.
Yes.
But those can be very, very devastating. In fact, at one point they said that they were talking about Pettis' ground and pound, but I'm like, the commentators are totally missing one of those up kicks, which could stop the fight right there. They didn't.
Agreed. I want to mention real quick, round 3, they come out to scrap. It ends up being the last round, as we end up finding out. But what I noticed immediately was the BJJ of Oliveira. I thought Oliveira might have been winning that round. And then you end up seeing Pettis' BJJ defense in that round, which was with the sweeps and transitions and getting out. Yes, they have the sweat. Joe Rogan always talks about the sweat that they develop by that third round, how it's easier to slip out of certain holds. But I mean, this was a clinic. Anybody who trains in mixed martial arts needs to watch this fight and look at it from both perspectives. Don't just look at Pettis winning the fight, but look at how Oliveira lasted as long as he did and where Oliveira gained points on the ground. Gabriel, talk about that third round and that finish to that fight. That was incredible.
I mean, one of the things that shocked me so much is when you have a high-level guy like Charles Oliveira, not only taking you down, but taking your back. I mean, I had to almost weigh it. How is this for two high-level guys? One, how is Anthony Pettis, for as good a grappler as he is, getting his back taken that many times?
Yeah.
Secondly, Oliveira, for being that good of a jiu-jitsu guy, how is he losing back position and ending up on his back with Pettis in his guard that many times in a fight? It's crazy, and I guess you gotta just chalk it up to the fact that both of these guys, it wasn't a jiu-jitsu match, it was mixed martial arts. And the ability to throw strikes, be patient, and move. That was just the most shocking. Obviously, I think Charles had accumulated a lot of damage, and that way in the third round, when Pettis finally did find the opening for the guillotine, I mean, we've seen him sink it before. I was just impressed just how well Anthony Pettis was able to make adjustments, not only on the feet, but on the ground, and I think that this really does make a big statement, and I wouldn't mind seeing him against number 5, Cub Swanson, next.
Wow. Okay. Well, I want to get to that. We're going to get to that real quick. I just want to ask one last question. Some fight fans want to analyze the guillotine as an elementary BJJ move. Can both of you guys give me a quick soundbite on what you think about the guillotine? That was a textbook guillotine. It gets a lot of heat. You know, oh, you got choked out by a guillotine. That's kind of a thing in MMA. That was a no joke guillotine.
Yeah.
Chris, tell me about that guillotine.
The guillotine is very dangerous, no matter, and I get why it gets a lot of heat because it seems to be so basic. You know, it's like, but no, he had it. I think he grabbed the chin when he went under, if I saw it correctly, and if he cradled it like it appeared, he's got such a good grip on the head that it's very difficult to get out of that at that point. And I think Oliveira, I'm trying to remember the position that he had of his body right at the moment that it happened, because a guillotine defense.
He did not have Pettis did not have Oliveira in a full guard. He almost had him in a bit of the half guard. He had a good grip on the neck. But I think
he was able to stretch him out with one leg. Is that
he eventually got it over? So
he got it over and he closed the guard.
Yes, but he had to hold. He had a good grip on Oliveira's neck to begin with, and that's why he was able to afford that extra real estate of time to finally lock in a full guard.
Yeah.
And then obviously choke him out from both sides as you're supposed to do in the guillotine.
Yeah, he must have sank it so fast and so deep, which is what I kind of got that. By the time Oliveira was able to respond, it was too late, because the defense for a guillotine is basically a hold on, tripod up on your feet, and you apply pressure with the shoulder.
Sure.
But if it's too late, if you're gone, you're gone.
Yeah, and of course, and in this particular case, Anthony Pettis actually going over to his back and placing his guard around the hips and back of Oliveira, which locked that thing in, and it was history from there.
Yeah, no,
you mentioned something about Cub Swanson. I have to get your thoughts on that. That's the next fight then for Anthony Pettis?
Yes, because look at the featherweight division.
This is
Obviously,
a throwback fight, by the way. Yeah, I would be really excited to see Cub Swanson fight Anthony Pettis. That is a fight that we might have saw in 2010.
Oh yeah, back in WEC.
Yes, sir.
No, but here's the thing. Cub Swanson, he's having his resurgence after falling a little bit off the track against Frankie Edgar and other guys at featherweight. But when you think about the logjam at the top, we talked about it last show with Conor McGregor. He's still the champion. Jose Aldo is first in line. You got a guy like Max Holloway up at the top. As exciting and dynamic as Anthony Pettis is, quite frankly, there's just guys ahead of him in line, even with all the promotion and popularity Pettis has.
Sure.
So I think if you think about it, we're probably, even if McGregor only fights 145 for the next, year and a half, let's say he's got to fight Aldo. Holloway is next. There's no saying that they won't have some kind of changing of the guard at the top. I think Pettis has to work his way back up. I think a fight against Swanson, maybe then the odd person out in the McGregor, Aldo, Holloway triangle at the top. Then we could definitely say, you know what, Anthony Pettis, 145 title shot. But
Absolutely.
Cub Swanson is the next one in line.
Yeah, and folks, if you haven't seen our UFC 202 coverage of Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz, you can check that out on AfterBuzz's YouTube page or all the other distributors and partners that we have here at AfterBuzz TV. It was a great coverage of that. I really enjoyed that conversation.
Oh, that was
as well.
a fun one to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move right along now. We have a lot to talk about. We have steamrolled through this coverage so far, but we have several more fights to talk about. We even want to later on kind of have a little bit of introspective on what happened with Benson Henderson on Friday night in Bellator, and that is still to come.
Yeah.
But for now, let's go on to Paige Vanzant and Bec Rawlings. Bec Rawlings is somebody I wouldn't want to fight.
Oh,
you know what I mean? And Paige Vanzant taking that fight, both of them on shorter notice, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
There was an issue. Educate our fans on what happened with her original opponent, PVZ's original opponent, and then talk about that finish, man.
I don't think it was necessarily I don't remember if she had an original opponent change as much as she apparently had issues with her cornerman not being able to come with her to the fight, and there was this fight week adjustment.
Got it.
I don't know
Okay.
whether it's visas or anything like that. Bec Rawlings, like, you know what? I always describe it. She's one of those women. She fights with like that gangster. You know,
Yes.
she comes in.
She has that
and-
Stockton feel that Nate and
Yeah,
Nick have.
Stockton,
You know?
Yeah, you know, shoot, like the female Diaz. You know, the Diaz sister.
And she's tatted up, and just her,
And the
just the
undercut
way she
haircut.
kind of has her guard with her fist. She's very just raw and gritty.
She looks like she could actually get paired up against you.
Yeah.
I think she could slip through and nobody noticed.
Dana's interested. He's like Christian Cole, and
Hey, she looks like she could beat up Mr. BJJ over here.
it's possible.
No, but definitely, I mean, Bec Rawlings, insane kind of gritty and toughness. What I found surprising, obviously, Paige Vanzant has been gone since December. She did Dancing with the Stars, and I've talked about this on my website. Paige needed a big victory, and she had to look good in order to justify, you know, taking her little hiatus.
Yep.
Because she even alluded to this. The reason that she's so unique for the movie roles and everything Hollywood is that she's different by being a fighter.
Yes.
Without a fighter, she's just another pretty face on the movies, just like a million others. But she has that popularity because she's a UFC fighter.
And boy, is she a UFC
Yes.
fighter, and she proved it. Go ahead. Yes,
Well, I was going to say, but the first round, Bec Rawlings had it in control. She had the octagon control. Paige had some trouble getting her range going. She missed with the switch kicks. That obviously did get the attention of her cornerman. Going into the second round, I had Paige behind.
Yep.
The cornerman said, hey, back to basics. Look, I think the cornerman was obviously correct, but the shot that wins the fight is not one you can argue
That's
against.
right. Well, what we noticed in the first round, and Chris, tell me if you agree with this. What we noticed in the first round is we noticed that, I noticed personally, I won't speak for anybody else, that Paige was losing the fight. I mean, I don't know that she lost
did.
the first round, but I just felt like it was close, but that it just seemed like she was doing cutesy stuff. She was doing fancy stuff. And Bec was just coming forward, just trying to punch her in the face. And the cutesy stuff wasn't working out for PVZ that much. But what we noticed then is one kick is all it takes. Talk about that kick. That was one of the best switch kicks I've seen, one of the best kick knockouts. That will be on not only her highlight reel, but the UFC's highlight reel as they go on in a promotional package. Talk about that, Chris Howard.
Well, you know, it was interesting. It was the exact same kick that she led out with in round one. So when she came out in round one, the first thing that she flew through was that same switch kick. So it was and what I loved about the kick was that, and it didn't it didn't really land in round one. It landed obviously in round two, but she really, the first part of the kick, which was with the right leg, so she jumps up with the right leg and then
Makes
does a
the
round
switch in
kick.
midair.
Yeah, does a round kick over with the left leg. But that first part of the kick, she sold that for real. If that hit, it would have, you know, it was going to do damage as well. And that's what I really appreciated about that kick, because a lot of people will fake and jump up, and it was essentially a fake, but it was real. She threw it.
And she caught Bec Rawlings right on the cheek, right in the meat of the face, and Bec went to sleep right away with PVZ coming in to try and drop a couple hammer fists, all just...
None of them landed, by the way.
None of them
not
landing.
a single one of those hammer fists landed.
Yeah, you know, and I have to say, you know, the refereeing in mixed martial arts in general has just gotten better and better. We don't talk about that enough as fight fans, as analysts of this game. The refereeing has gone a long way. Even Yves Levine looked good yesterday, a guy who's taken a lot of criticism over the years as a bad referee. You know, there seems to be an understanding, and now the fight rules are changing. We can maybe get a little bit of conversation about that before the end of today. But we saw some stuff happening yesterday that if the fight rules had changed, things would be different in many of these fights. But when you have a fight like what Paige Vanzant put on yesterday, there was no question about it. boom, kick, you go to bed, I win, that's it.
No, definitely. Real quick, we gotta acknowledge UFC taking full advantage of the fact they understand Paige just got a lot of fans off Dancing with the Stars. Those fans aren't necessarily gonna shell out $50 just to watch her on an undercard of a pay-per-view, but putting her on Fox where they could take full advantage. Hey, you saw her on Dancing with the Stars, now let's catch her on Fox. She did a great move not only for herself but the UFC, so it worked out well for everybody. In terms of the referees, look, we obviously had that controversy earlier in the year, the fighter in Ireland who, yes, unfortunately passed away following the fight. Obviously, there's events such as Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold.
Right.
That was the one everyone was talking about. How'd you let him come back out for the fourth? I think a lot of the referees anymore, they kind of had to take the refresher course because no one wants to be the guy that put the life at risk. You're supposed to be able to trust these guys. And, I think the fact that there was any kind of chatter, even just the rumor of chatter with the fans made all these referees want to step up their game, make sure, hey, almost even play it too cautiously, which I understand as fight fans, hey, it's competition, let them go. But you know what? Safety first, and we're seeing a lot of great stoppages, educated referees, and they're making for just good action. So I'm great with it.
And even on the independent circuit now, I actually work for a promotion called Get Down Fights here in Los Angeles, and we now see CAMO, the California Athletic Mixed Martial Arts Organization, employing former fighters as judges and refs. I've seen Frank Trigg. I've seen a few other, there's kind of escaping me right now, but a few other great Hall of Fame professional fighters are now going in to be referees because as a referee, you need to be the expert in the ring. You need to be as educated about MMA and fighting as anybody in that building, and we're seeing it now, and I appreciate it as a fighter. We are moving right along. We only have a few more things to talk about, but I want to go straight to this fight. My favorite fight of the night. Can we just spend a few minutes talking about Joe Lauzon and Mr. Miller? What we noticed in this fight was that video games can happen in real life. It was awesome, dude.
It was as fun as the first fight, just without the blood. Because their war back in 2012, I remember that one being like, damn.
And I'm kind of a guy who would prefer no blood in a fight because I don't like cuts being a factor in the fight. I like damage, sort of like, strikes to the head, strikes to the body, weakening a guy. When you see a cut, yes, it happens with elbows and forearms and knees and these types of things, but it's nice to not have that and still see a fight like this. These guys beat the crap out of each other, Chris Howard.
Well, you go back to who are the two guys that Forrest Griffin and Bonner, Stephen Bonner. They did beat the crap out of each other. It looked to me the whole time that Lauzon was getting the best of the fight, though.
Yeah. It was almost like if you play Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter video games, and they have their power bars. But in this case, their power bars weren't going down. They just kept landing punches, and it was incredible stuff. Yes. Great combinations, great exchanges by both fighters.
Right.
I love it when you can watch a fight, and at the end of the fight, you say to yourself, everybody looked good in this fight. There wasn't a loser. No war, no loser. But we did end up seeing obviously Miller win the fight. But Lauzon, might see some good opportunities in being able to get prize fights after putting on a show like this, as he always has.
He's one of those guys. He's up there, I think, with Diaz and Anderson Silva for post-fight bonuses. It seems like I think they said it's notable if Lauzon fights and he doesn't win a bonus. And if I'm not mistaken, they took fight of the night again last night.
Yeah, so fight of the night last night was Jim Miller versus Joe Lauzon, as I'm doing a little research.
And I think Lauzon had more bonuses than anybody else. I think he had the top, didn't he?
Yeah, I think I want to say he's up there. I feel like he's I want to say he's, if not number one in post-fight bonuses ever in UFC, at least top 3. We have a lot of fans watching. Thank you for tuning in. But definitely in the comments, let us know we're correct. But I could swear that Lauzon is top 3 post-fight bonuses all time.
Even if you're not correct, you're always correct in my heart.
Oh, look at that. There's love. There's brotherly love right here in the room.
You know what? The new guy knows exactly what to say in this first week. But definitely, can we talk about that decision, though? Because
we need to talk about that. Okay. I want to talk about that. Before you say your opinion on that, I have to tell the fans, this is the second week in a row we've done this show. Last week, I did think that I had Nate Diaz winning that fight. I didn't think it was a robbery. I'm going on the record today. I think this was a robbery. I think Joe Lauzon was robbed. He did win that fight to me. I had him winning round 1 decidedly. I had Miller winning 2, and I had Lauzon winning round 3. You disagree?
Yeah, Half. I do agree that Lauzon had the decision. I scored it for him personally at home. I actually gave Lauzon the first 2. I gave Miller the third on damage just because he came out with that great flurry in the 3rd round to open it that really seemed to finally back up and deliver the damage he needed to take momentum
Well,
away
now you're
from
just
Joe.
flat out incorrect. It's just now there's no saving you, Gabriel.
You know what? George, where are you at?
I got another one. I got another one. He actually has won more performance of the night bonuses than any other fighter.
Ever.
I told
Ever.
you.
Yeah. Maybe Dana and him are
Can
like
I get
golfing
a
buddies.
what?
Who knows? Chris Howard, talk
Yeah.
a little bit about this fight, the war, and talk about. Am I wrong? Was Joe Lauzon robbed in this fight?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think he was robbed in the fight. I think that what I really appreciated with Jim Miller was his defense and his ability, because I mean he was on the bottom a lot.
Yeah.
And he was able to defend and he was able to keep going. I can't help but when I was watching the fight, I kept thinking he just looks a little older and more like he had taken more wear and tear than Lauzon. And Lauzon just seemed to have a little bit more youth and in him.
Just that spring in his step.
The spring in his step, yeah, it just looked a little sharper, a little crisper. Although they were both brilliant tacticians,
Yeah.
Joe Lauzon looked a little bit crisper to me.
Chris Howard,
So-
there are 2 types of fighters in this world. There are fighters who like getting hit in the face or don't mind it, and there are fighters who hate getting hit in the face. And you can, if you watch UFC or boxing or any of these combat sports, you can notice to yourself who is who. And in this fight, you saw 2 guys who don't mind getting hit in the face. There were points where Jim Miller was coming in and with the stand-up striking when they were doing exchanges, and he was throwing short forearms with his forearms straight ahead. If you're watching us on YouTube, you could see kind of the. But talk about that. That is a risky strike to throw. You're going to get hit when you throw that. Yes, you can knock a fighter out, you can create damage, but you're going to take punishment. Talk about that, man. These guys are warriors to take that kind of punishment.
We can say they're warriors, but at the same time, for me, if any place where you allow yourself an opening to lose is a mistake.
Okay.
So because as long as you're doing that, you're bound to get hit, and if you're bound to get hit, they say there's always a puncher's chance. So somebody can take you down. So I think, from my perspective, a tighter game is to eliminate all possibility of getting hit at all.
Yes.
And when you talked about Maia, I think you said that he's only been hit 13 times.
Yeah.
Incredible.
For me, that speaks about excellent defense. What is your defense when you're closing the gap, when you're getting in for the clinch, and all of that.
But if we're going to speak about an excellent pocketbook, it is guys like this who keep getting opportunities, who go in there.
That's
and
because the crowds love it.
They
Yeah,
love
the crowds
it.
love
They
it.
love
Point out, they're on the main card. For as exciting and decorated as they are, they're not even ranked.
That's
neither
crazy,
of
really?
them is in the top 15. I know.
You're right.
Because I was looking at that. It's like, wait, where are they at? Then I'm like, they're not even ranked.
No,
even
they're
though
not.
they
Well, maybe
came
that's
off big
why.
wins at 200. I mean, look, we all know they've had their hiccups. I remember, obviously, Miller being taken out pretty decisively by Nate Diaz. Obviously, Lauzon has that knockout loss to Anthony Pettis. But the fact is, fans know that they were going to bring it and put on a show, and
Right.
that's why the UFC acknowledges that and puts them on the main card
And
of
they
shows
deserve
like
to
Fox.
be on the main card without a doubt.
Yes.
Gabriel Gonzalez. I would suggest even these. We talked a little bit earlier about how Carlos Condit is a championship caliber fighter, a guy who wants to be a champion and really nothing else. And in this particular case, with Lauzon and Miller, you have guys who are just ready to scrap and feed their children. And I love that.
And ultimately, it's entertainment too. And I
Yes.
think that
Oh, yeah.
these guys get that. Forrest Griffin and Stephen Bonner got that.
Yes.
Paige Vanzant gets that.
Yes.
They say don't do the fancy kicks. Those fancy kicks are part of
Yes.
entertaining the crowd. and
Yeah,
bringing it.
Rodriguez, we didn't cover the fight, but he had another good one. Flashy style. This stuff is what gets people in the seats.
Agreed.
Yeah, gets the people to tune in and obviously later on pay for that pay-per-view.
Yes, that's
Yes.
actually true. Now, we have a
ahead.
few more minutes. I want to talk about, and you know what? We're hosting the show. We're going to talk about what we want to talk about.
Yeah.
UFC is fantastic, but I'm always about supporting all of MMA, creating a healthy competition in the sport, and Bellator has really been making a lot of noise recently. On Friday, we saw 2 things I want to go over. One, Benson Henderson winning a fight in really odd fashion against Fabricio Pitbull. 2 former UFC stars go into Bellator. They fight it out. Fabricio breaks his foot. We'll talk about that, and I want to talk about the debut of Rory McDonald, a guy who many think has the canter of a serial killer. He is such a weird dude. They have this huge promo. It's got kind of that WWE style entrance where he comes out and, you know, the
lights
big
and the
screens
fireworks.
and the lights and fireworks, and he comes down and he is awkward as hell, no expression at all, completely nervous. That's never been his thing, but it's also kind of what he is. Like that serial killer gimmick that he has, like we talk about in pro wrestling, is what makes him interesting to me. What do we expect from him? Is he a threat to Michael Venom Page and Page's soaring rise to the top of MMA right now as an entertaining fighter? What are we going to see from Rory? Talk about Benson Henderson, guys. What do we got here?
Well, definitely with Rory, the fact is, okay, he had his stumbles leaving the UFC now, but that contrasting his personality versus the promo, I couldn't get over it when I watched it. It's like, you know, why didn't you just say, hey, just bring me out, just say my name and we'll do the interview? But they had the pageantry, the pump and flash. But I do think that Rory McDonald, okay, you got to think, how is he coming off that loss to Robbie Lawler and now Wonderboy Thompson? Because when we talked about it, Rory was quite frankly flinching a bit when Stephen Thompson was going at him.
Yes.
And I think that says a lot about just how much damage he took. He's still a relatively young guy.
Yes, he is.
And so I think we're gonna see him fight Michael Venom Page, MVP. Now, where he's at though, I think that's gonna say a lot about how many more years he has in his career. Is he gonna be able to get back to form, or is he maybe just he lost something in that fight with Robbie Lawler? But definitely, I think he has the ability to make waves, and I'm excited to see him in Bellator.
Chris Howard, tell me your thoughts on Michael Venom Page. If you guys haven't seen the footage, go on to YouTube and look for him in his fight against Cyborg Santos, where he actually gave him a knee so hard to the top of his head here. If you look at the x-ray, it all shattered into his head. Actually a really scary moment for MMA fight fans and people who care about these guys as human beings. Talk about that, Chris Howard. Talk about that knee. Talk about MVP. And is Rory McDonald a threat to MVP's rise?
It's not golf, Christian.
I know, right?
It's okay. It's easy to do when you watch enough ESPN.
McElroy McDonald, yeah.
I think anytime you sustain a lot of damage, that's a problem. We've just seen time and time again that people that have been hurt badly, and we saw it with George St. Pierre, we saw it with Anderson Silva, we see every time. So, and we saw it with.
Are you alluding to McDonald now, right?
What's that?
Are you alluding to McDonald?
Rory McDonald.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anytime you sustain a lot of damage, the chances of coming back, they go down because it takes something. It does something to the psyche.
Yeah.
Does something to the psychology, and there's just wear and tear on that, and that goes back to the same question that we had with Condit tonight. Can he come back after the defeat and after the loss? So when we talk about Robbie, it's Rory. When we talk about Rory, is he going to come back, or is he going to be a threat to anybody out there? I don't know.
Chris Howard, talk a little bit about Bellator and the current status of Bellator. Is this a company that has any possibility of threatening UFC? We're noticing a lot of guys in UFC a little disgruntled, looking for other places to make money to feed their kids, and some guys not really too keen on the way that Conor McGregor's treatment from Dana White, the buddy sort of relationships, the sort of bias that we're seeing in UFC. Not everybody agrees with that analysis, but that is sort of the rumbles around MMA. Can Bellator be an alternative for fighters, and could Bellator champions be taken seriously as Hall of Famers in the game?
It's a fascinating thing with Bellator. I mean, I talked to Hoist Gracie right when they were launching Bellator, and he was going over as the ambassador for Bellator at the time. And I thought it was kind of neat that they were bringing back all these old guys, all the people that hadn't been on, and fought out there forever, but they still had a following, probably more with baby boomers who saw them fight in the beginning, So
sure.
They were bringing their following over, and then the fight card started to get interesting, and it was like, okay, this is something worth watching. I think that the likelihood of them being a real competitive threat to the UFC is virtually nil.
Okay.
My thought is that they will probably end up getting bought by the UFC.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably where it'll go from my perspective.
Sure.
I think, we saw when UFC bought Strikeforce, obviously Bellator suddenly swept in as the number 2 promotion. So you do still need a different, organization besides UFC. Not everyone can just go from local show to UFC. There have to be, it's just how the business is.
Yeah.
Now, that said, when you look at guys like Eddie Alvarez, now you got Will Brooks, we've had Hector Lombard here for a while. the idea
Czech Congo
that,
now going
yes.
and a big fight for him coming up in Bellator.
Yeah, well, what I was saying is, my point, the former Bellator champions coming in and really kicking butt in the UFC. Obviously, these guys coming in, and we got Eddie Alvarez winning the title now.
Yes.
So the fact, saying that the Bellator champions are illegitimate or not world-class, it's a case-by-case basis. Obviously, you look at... I'm trying to think who's their welterweight champion before Michael Venom Page. Ben Askren.
Askren.
You know, he's a guy, okay, maybe he's not going to catch the fire of popularity like a guy, just absolute banger like Eddie Alvarez is. But he's another guy, okay, maybe not going to UFC, maybe not star-bound. So it's a case-by-case. Regarding having the veterans come in and fight, look, no disrespect to Royce Gracie. We all know he's a legend. But that fight with Ken Shamrock sometimes, and you watch him,
it looked rigged.
It's like are we watching MMA or are we watching the circus?
Yeah.
Right.
And you know,
with Kimbo Slice and
yes,
some of the
and
other...
I want to be careful with that because obviously respect to the
All
late
respect to-
Kimbo
yes.
Slice.
Right.
But even that fight live in the moment, none of the aftermath. What are they doing selling us this?
Well, you know, Dada 5000 wasn't necessarily
Yes.
ready for that fight. Bellator kind of has a
Kimbo
gimmicky
wasn't
feel
ready
to it.
at the time, quite
Agreed.
frankly.
Yes.
But those
so-
were gimmicks. They weren't. It
Yeah.
wasn't because of the fighting capacity of the two fighters. I mean, they're old guys. You know, Royce and Ken are old.
So that's why I'm back and forth. Bellator is a perfectly solid promotion.
Sure.
I'm not a big fan of these gimmick fights, but I understand that it's how they get their revenue when they don't have the name brand of the UFC guys available.
You and I are on different sides of the fence on this one. I love the idea of a gimmicky fight. I am so excited for CM Punk to fight, regardless of his
my
inexperience. I am
goodness.
so excited, and I mean it genuinely. It's like, yeah, you have to have like a little bit of like bells and whistles because not everybody's just gonna get into MMA just because it's MMA. They need reasons. Maybe they can even get Rory McIlroy to come in and fight like a golfer, and then we can bring the golf world in.
Rory
See, that's why I like-
versus Rory McDonald.
I like the old matches where you had Royce fighting a 600-pound sumo wrestler and having the differences in sizes and stuff.
too.
I like that stuff,
Me
and
too.
I also liked the when they would go 3 fights in an evening. I thought that was fantastic.
Tournament style fight,
Yeah,
yes.
I don't think we're going to see that.
Real quick, gentlemen, can I get quick thoughts on Benson Henderson and his future?
I think that Benson Henderson, we still gotta see where he's at following that loss. He did win last night. He wasn't winning that first round.
No,
he was a
not.
little tentative. That said, Benson Henderson is a 5-round fighter, so that's another one we'll never know.
Not only is he a
They're gonna have to
5-round
run
fighter,
it.
Gabriel Gonzalez, but he is a megastar in the sport.
Oh,
Chris, can Benson Henderson take Bellator to the next level?
Well, I think it's going to be, once again, it's not it's not do we have that positive psychology? It's can we get back up afterwards? So we're going to see, is he able to get back up? Is he able to recover and ever reach where he was before?
And
Absolutely.
he's got to get Michael. If he wants to be a star again, he's got to take out Michael Chandler in decisive fashion. Show, hey, this is why I was brought in to get the big money. And I think they got a great fight. That's a great matchup.
I agree with you there. Mr. Chris Howard, tell our AfterBuzz fans where they can find you. sir.
Reach me at Chris Howard Live on Twitter and Instagram. Also go to legendarylivingdaily.com for tips, inspiration, motivation, that type of stuff. Check it out.
LegendaryLivingDaily.com. And for you, Mr. Gabriel
Nice.
Gonzalez.
You can find my website, gonzo13.wordpress.com. And Let's Talk UFC at Twitter, Double G on TV.
Gabriel Gonzalez is the type of guy who will talk about MMA all day, every day. Hit him up at 3:30 in the morning. He is down. Folks, if you
I have to
enjoyed
work
this,
the next day.
folks, if you enjoyed this AfterBuzz coverage of UFC Fight Night 21 on Fox, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff. You can follow me at XGinCole, XTIANCOLE. I will be at Paragon Pro Wrestling in Las Vegas on September 8th. Thank you so much for joining us. Tweet us, let us know. Join the conversation, everybody. This was AfterBuzz coverage of UFC 21 on Fox.
See you next time.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
See you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.